Hello, my name is Maya Smith, and my project is called Bon Appetit, The Importance of Food. Food conveys love when words aren't big enough. Dr. Alan Wolcott. I feel this statement is very true, especially when times are tough or when there's not a lot of words to be said. My thesis is that the importance of, there are many things that help define us in life, but food is one of the most important things. A roadmap to how we'll be proving this is three main subjects: the background of a person, the psychology of how the mind works, and the culture that a person comes from. First off, I need to set a basis of understanding of how taste works. Taste is when taste is achieved when a food goes onto your tongue and there are thousands of pulpae called taste buds, and there are five different categories of these taste buds, and they sense these five sensations: bitter, sour, sweet, salty, and unami, a Japanese word that means the sensation of fat. The more a person has, or the less a person has of a certain sense of taste bud, the more they crave it. For instance, if a person lacked salt taste buds, then they eat a lot more salt to compensate for this. Next, I will be talking about the background of a person and how it affects what foods they eat. Every person, every day, has a certain pattern of foods that they eat, and they repeat this daily, and it becomes part of their system. This is important because whatever foods you eat or where you go shopping helps choose what foods that you end up eating. Another thing that helps with the background of food is the diversity where it comes from. If a country has a lot of diversity and there's a lot of different backgrounds, then a food can have inspiration from many different cultures and therefore show diversity. Another thing that background can help bring is that there's a sense of belonging. If, for instance, if somebody has a similar background as you and eats similar foods as you feel like you're part of something larger, even if there's not a lot of people like you. Next, I'll be talking about um, continuing on that. People who have a similar background can bond from eating foods that they share in common. For instance, a person who doesn't know anybody else but happens to meet somebody who has a similar background as them can feel safer and more comfortable even if they're not completely at home. Another thing is that if you see somebody you know and you're close to eating a certain kind of food, you will feel a lot more comfortable eating it. And therefore, the background of the food makes you feel more comfortable and therefore makes you maybe go outside of your comfort zone. Next, I'll be talking about the psychology and of the brain and how it affects food. First of all, there are the brain likes to have certain chemicals in order to be happy. But these chemicals might not make you feel very healthy or help your body that much. For instance, even though your brain really likes the sensation that caffeine gives it, caffeine alone is not very nutritious. The main reason that humans need food is to gain nutrition from them and therefore be healthy. So, if you the reason food is necessary is in order to get nutrients and vitamins. A food is considered nutritious if it has a lot of the necessary vitamins and minerals in order to keep you healthy. This healthful diet is when you have all kinds of the foods that you need and are necessary for a good life and a good healthy body, and helps your body maximize its potential. Even though a food might not be that nutritious or healthy, if you eat it in a certain way, if you eat it in a positive manner, then it will not be as have as negative effects as if you ate it in a negative manner. For example, if you just are really sad one day and you want some cake and you eat the cake and you feel really guilty about it and you know that this cake is the worst thing ever for you, then it's going to affect your body a lot more negatively than if you're with friends and it's somebody's birthday and you're eating the cake and you're happy and you're laughing. You actually won't have as many negative effects as if you were sad and upset about it. This is called the placebo effect, often seen in medications. If you think something's good's going to happen, it will. And if you think something negative is going to happen, that will also come true. Another thing that the brain controls when it comes to food is how full you are. For instance, if you have a small plate with a certain amount of food and a large plate with the same amount of food, if you eat it off the large plate, you won't feel as full as if you ate it off the small plate. The brain helps to determine when you're full, even though your stomach has its own thoughts. Another thing is that if you eat off of a plate that has red and you're eating red pasta, you will eat a lot more of it than if you ate off of a green plate, for instance. So if the food blends in, or if it looks like it's not a lot, then your brain will tell you to eat more and you won't be as full from it. These are more ways in order to trick your brain into thinking that you're eating a lot, even if you aren't necessarily eating that much, and you'll get the most positive effects out of it. Another thing that helps with the way the brain processes the food and the psychology aspect of it is that if you have a special bond with a food, your brain will treat it as such. For instance, if you have a tradition of always eating a certain food every week and it has a positive connotation, then you will eat it more with more of a positive aspect than if it makes you feel sad. Next, I'll be talking about the culture and how that affects food and how it impacts you. The definition of culture is a certain set of traits or mannerisms and ways that you learn from life and from people around you. And it is not, you aren't born with culture, it's learned. So, there are many types of cultures around the world, and each culture has a different set of food and a different set of values with this food. For instance, the geography of a place helps determine what foods are there. Like if there's a river or a desert, then that determines what foods are there. And it also helps to determine which foods are more plentiful and which are more rare. Another thing that differentiates cultures is the economic standpoint. For instance, if the country is very poor and doesn't have a lot of money, then they will have not as many foods and not as big of a variety as a country that is wealthier and has more access to different kinds of foods. Another thing that impacts the food a culture has is its natural resources. For instance, large rivers or being an island would lead to a lot of fish and other water foods instead of not having them. Another thing that helps with this is the role of food and how it affects a person. For instance, in some cultures, food is thought of as an integral and necessary part of life and has a very high value on it. Whereas in other places, it's just something you eat and is not that important. Therefore, the roles that the food plays leads to how it affects you and what you think of it every day. Different countries also have different times and different sizes for their meals. For instance, in some countries, they eat a large lunch time meal and a smaller dinner, whereas here in America, we have a smaller lunch and a larger dinner. This can affect how the food is consumed, what time, and what your routine is, and what you feel is normal. Another thing that I did was I did an outreach project. In my outreach, I had a potluck with the ESL students and Flex, and it was a blending of cultures because I asked that people bring foods from their different heritage or background, and we would share it and we talked about it. And it opened a lot of doors and it made people start to realize how positive differences can be and how not to take others for granted even if they are different and how it can be a positive thing. Food is one of the most important and necessary parts of life. Without it, there would be no life. But it's important to realize how important it is and that it's not just something to take for granted. Food helps shape us in many different ways that probably never would have thought of. I just wanted to focus on food and show people how important it is and how it's not something to take for granted. It's necessary and it is very nurturing as well. It makes you happy and it can also build relationships with others besides those that you already know. Thank you.